I moved to Willow Creek because I wanted peace. After 30 years of chasing criminals through alleyways, negotiating with mayors over budgets, and attending more funerals for fallen officers than I care to remember, I was done. I had earned my quiet life. My wife, Elena, and I bought a modest house on a tree-lined cul-de-sac, the kind of place where kids ride bikes in the street and neighbors wave over the fence. I traded police sirens for chirping birds, and the smell of gunpowder for freshly cut grass. Or at least, that's what I thought I was trading it for. Turns out, evil doesn't always wear ski masks or break into banks. Sometimes it wears pastel cardigans, carries a clipboard, and introduces itself with a smile as fake as the HOA rulebook it clutches. Her name was Karen Wetlock, and from the moment she learned that a new couple had moved into the neighborhood, she decided it was her mission to make my life anything but peaceful. At first, it was subtle, a pamphlet about lawn-length guidelines tucked under my doormat. A friendly reminder about trash bin placement. I ignored it. I had faced worse in my life than a nosy neighbor. But everything changed the day she saw what was parked in my garage. It was my father's car. A 1969 Mustang Boss 429 in candy apple red, one of the rarest muscle cars ever built. It wasn't just a machine, it was a memory. My father bought it brand new when he was a young mechanic with more ambition than money. He rebuilt that engine 3 times, taught me how to change brake pads on that car, and drove me to my police academy graduation in it. After he passed, it became my responsibility to keep it alive. I didn't drive it much, maybe once or twice a year, but every weekend I'd polish the chrome until I could see my reflection. It was my way of talking to him again. To me, it was sacred. To Karen, it was a violation. The first time she brought it up was at the annual neighborhood barbecue. Elena and I had been there for less than 10 minutes when Karen descended, clipboard in hand, a forced smile plastered across her lips. "Mr. Matthews," she said, pronouncing every syllable like it was a courtroom cross-examination. "I couldn't help but notice that vehicle in your garage. It hasn't moved in weeks." I smiled politely. "It's a project car," I said, trying to keep the conversation casual. "A classic. Belonged to my dad." Her eyes narrowed. According to the HOA bylaws, Section 8.3c, non-operational vehicles cannot be visible from the street. It's been stationary for at least 21 days. That's a violation. I dealt with gang leaders more reasonable than this woman. "I'll look into it," I said, and walked away before I said something less diplomatic. That's when I noticed the kid. 17, maybe 18, standing behind her with a slouch that screamed entitlement. Designer sneakers, phone in hand, zero respect in his posture. His name, I would later learn, was Chase, Karen's only son. As I walked back toward the buffet table, I heard him ask, loud enough for me to catch, "Is that a Boss 429? I turned, surprised he even knew what it was. "Good eye," I said. "It is. You selling it?" he asked, not as a question, but as if it were already decided. "Not a chance," I replied. "It's not for sale." That was the moment the line was drawn. I didn't know it yet, but Chasey's casual question was the spark that would ignite everything that followed. And Karen, she wasn't just a rule enforcer. She was a mother determined to give her son whatever he wanted, even if it meant breaking the law. The first notice arrived a week later. Friendly violation warning, taped to my front door. Then another, this one with a $5 fine attached. Then a third, claiming that failure to comply could result in legal action and towing. I logged into the HOA portal to check. Nothing. No record of any violations. It was all smoke and mirrors, harassment disguised as bureaucracy. I'd seen this tactic before, not from neighbors, but from corrupt officials trying to squeeze civilians. Only this time, the enemy wasn't hiding behind a badge. She was standing across the street in a lavender sweater set, sipping iced tea, and watching my house like a hawk. Elena urged me to ignore it. "They'll get bored eventually," she said. But I knew better. People like Karen don't stop when you ignore them. They take your silence as permission, and I refused to give her that. Then, one morning, everything escalated. It was a Tuesday, calm, sunny, uneventful. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I heard a car door slam outside. 2, 3. Then, the unmistakable sound of knuckles on wood. Hard, impatient, and deliberate. I opened the door, still in my tee, shirt and jeans, to find Karen standing on my porch with that same smug smile. Chase was next to her, bouncing on his heels like a kid on Christmas morning. "Mr. Matthews," she said sweetly, "we've reached the end of the line. Your vehicle is being impounded." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "On what grounds?" She tapped her clipboard. "Violation 8.3c. It's unregistered and non-operational." And after speaking with a friend at the DMV, I learned it's essentially abandoned property. I've already reported it as a stolen vehicle. The police are on their way. It took every ounce of discipline I had not to laugh in her face. She had actually called the police. Over a car parked in my own garage. My car, my father's legacy, and the best part, she had reported it as stolen. Right on cue, 2 patrol cars screeched around the corner, lights flashing. 4 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. One of them I knew personally. I'd pinned his badge on him myself 2 years earlier at the academy graduation. The other, a veteran sergeant, scanned the scene and then looked at me. "Sir," he said, "we received a report of a stolen vehicle at this address." Karen pointed dramatically toward my garage. "There it is, officer. A 1969 Mustang Boss 429. Stolen from the city last week. He's hiding it." I walked slowly toward the car, letting the tension stretch. My heart was steady. My face was calm. Then, with deliberate movements, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. Not my driver's license, my badge. The gold shield caught the morning light as I held it up. "Sergeant," I said, my voice level and cold, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The sergeant's eyes widened. He straightened instinctively. "Chief Matthews," he stammered. "Sir, Karen's smile vanished. Chase's jaw fell open, and in that moment, the entire dynamic shifted. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I wasn't a passive victim of HOA harassment. I was the highest, ranking law enforcement officer in the city. And she had just made a false police report directly to me? I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You tied up an emergency line for a bylaw dispute. That's a crime. And now, Mrs. Wetlock, you're under investigation." Her face drained of color. Chase shuffled backward, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. The predator had just realized she was prey. And this was only the beginning. After that morning, everything in Willow Creek changed. The same neighbors who once waved from their porches now peeked nervously through curtains. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when the HOA president is accused of filing a false police report against the city's own police chief. I would have loved to believe Karen had learned her lesson, that humiliation would humble her. But people like Karen don't retreat. They regroup, and the more you corner them, the more dangerous they become. It started with the small things. A ticket taped to my mailbox, alleging that my grass exceeded regulation height by half an inch. A letter citing inappropriate exterior decor because of a garden Nomalana had placed near our walkway. Even the mailbox itself became a target, a notice threatening a fine because its shade of blue wasn't approved. All of it petty. All of it deliberate. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about punishment. But there was something more insidious at work beneath the surface. I noticed Chase loitering near my driveway more often, pretending to skateboard with friends while sneaking glances into my garage. Twice, I found fingerprints on the Mustang's cover that weren't mine. Once, I discovered a flyer under the wiper advertising collector car buying service. It wasn't subtle. It was a message. They wanted that car, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. Elena wanted me to ignore it. "We could move," she said one night over dinner, her voice soft but strained. "Start fresh somewhere else." But I had spent decades telling people not to let bullies win. I wasn't about to run now, not from someone like Karen. "We're not going anywhere," I said. "This is our home, and if she wants a fight, she's about to get one." The next escalation came a week later, this time in the form of a drone. I was sipping coffee on the back porch when I heard the faint buzz overhead. At first, I thought it was a bee. But when I looked up, a small quadcopter hovered just beyond the property line, its camera pointed directly at my garage. It darted away when I stepped forward, only to return an hour later from a different angle. Alina waved it off as paranoia, but I knew surveillance when I saw it. This wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. I traced the drone's flight path one afternoon and followed it back visually as far as I could. No surprise. It disappeared behind Karen's house. The next morning, I knocked on her door. She answered with her usual smug expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, pretending innocence so poorly it was almost insulting. "You need to stop," I said calmly. "The fines, the tickets, the harassment, and especially the drone. It's illegal to record someone on their property without consent." Her smile never wavered. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," she said sweetly. "But if you have a complaint, you're free to bring it up with the HOA board. I am the law, Karen," I said, leaning in slightly. "And this isn't a game." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "It's just a car," she called after me. "Why not sell it? It's obviously causing you so much trouble." I didn't answer, but the chill in her words told me everything. This wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics. It wasn't even about the bylaws. This was about Chase, about entitlement, greed, and the belief that they could take whatever they wanted if they pushed hard enough. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. The first step was gathering evidence. I set up motion, activated cameras around the garage and driveway, small enough to be hidden but powerful enough to capture clear footage. I also installed a basic tracking device inside the Mustang. A precaution, just in case their obsession escalated. And then I waited. It didn't take long. 3 nights later at exactly 2:14 a.m., the cameras caught movement. A figure in a dark hoodie crept onto my driveway, crouched near the garage door, and began fumbling with the handle. He wasn't a professional. His movements were clumsy, nervous. The footage was grainy, but the outline was unmistakable. Chase. And he wasn't alone. A second figure, smaller, slighter, stood lookout near the street, glancing around nervously. It was Karen. They didn't get far. The reinforced garage door was too much for their amateur skills. But they'd crossed a line, one they couldn't uncross. This was no longer harassment. It was attempted burglary. I didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, I compiled the footage, time-stamped and documented, and placed it into a secure folder. If this went to court, I wanted every detail ready. But I had a better plan in mind. One that would end this once and for all. A week later, I attended the HOA monthly meeting, something I had intentionally avoided until now. The room fell silent when I walked in. Karen sat at the head of the long oak table, flanked by 3 board members who looked more like hostages than allies. "Chief Matthews," she said, voice dripping with false warmth. "What a surprise." "I thought it was time I got involved," I said, taking a seat directly across from her. After all, I'm part of this community too. The meeting was the usual circus of trivial complaints. Overgrown hedges, barking dogs, trash cans left out too long. But when the floor opened for new business, I raised my hand. "I'd like to address the issue of harassment," I said calmly. Specifically, the repeated, targeted harassment of homeowners under false pretenses. Karen's smile faltered. "I'm not sure what you're referring to. Then maybe this will jog your memory." I opened my laptop and projected the footage from my security cameras onto the screen. Gasps rippled through the room as Chase appeared on camera, attempting to break into my garage. Karen's face turned crimson. "This," I said, "is a Class B felony, attempted burglary, and under state law, conspiracy charges apply to anyone aiding or abetting." The room was dead silent. Karen stammered, This is an invasion of privacy." I leaned back. "No, Karen. This is evidence. And I haven't even mentioned the drone footage, the falsified violation notices, or the false police report you filed." For the first time since I'd moved to Willow Creek, Karen looked afraid. Not angry, not smug, afraid. And that was good, because fear makes people careless. "Here's how this works," I said. "You're going to stop. No more fines. No more threats. No more games. And you're going to resign as HOA president. Effective immediately." "You can't make me?" "Actually," I interrupted, "I can. Because if you don't, I'll take all of this evidence to the district attorney. And when I do, you won't just lose your position, you'll lose your freedom." The silence was heavy. Finally, one of the board members spoke. I moved to vote on the president's resignation. The motion passed unanimously. Karen stormed out of the room without another word. Chase followed. Head down, humiliated. I'd won. Or at least, I thought I had. But victory has a way of blinding you. And as I was about to learn, Karen Wetlock wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. For a brief moment, life returned to normal. Elena and I spent weekends tending the garden. Neighbors started waving again, and the endless stream of petty violation letters vanished from our mailbox. I even began working on the Mustang, tightening bolts and cleaning out the carburetor, imagining the day I'd take it roaring down the highway like my father once did. It almost felt like peace had returned. Almost. 3 weeks after Karen's resignation, I was jolted awake at 6 a.m. by a pounding on the front door. It wasn't the sharp, polite knock of a delivery driver. It was the heavy, insistent thud of someone trying to deliver bad news. When I opened the door, my neighbor Tony stood there, panic written across his face. "Frank, my truck's gone," he said. "I parked it right out front last night. Now it's just gone." Tony was a handyman, the kind of guy who could fix anything with duct tape and stubbornness. That truck was his livelihood. "Did you call the police?" I asked. "They said they'll file a report," he replied, "but they won't even start looking unless it's been 48 hours. I can't wait that long, Frank. All my tools were in there." Something about the situation felt wrong. There was no broken glass, no sign of forced entry, and Tony swore he had locked it. Then he mentioned something else a week earlier. He'd received a violation notice from the HOA about an oil stain under the truck. A stain no bigger than a quarter. It said the vehicle could be subject to towing, if not addressed. He cleaned it, but now the truck was gone. A pit formed in my stomach. This wasn't random. It was organized. I started digging. Over the next few days, I combed through police records and talked to neighbors. The pattern was chilling. 10 other vehicles had vanished from Willow Creek in the past year, all after receiving HOA violation notices for trivial infractions. Every one of them was an older model, owned outright, with no outstanding loans or liens. and every tow had been authorized by the same small company. Reliable Roadside Recovery. On paper, Reliable looked legitimate. But a little digging revealed it was owned by a shell company. One that traced back to Oakwood Development Group, the same corporation funding the expansion of our neighborhood. Oakwood, the HOA, and the towing company were all part of the same ecosystem. And Karen, she was right in the middle of it. I felt a slow, cold anger build in my chest. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was a criminal operation, a coordinated effort to steal vehicles under the guise of law enforcement. And I had a feeling I knew exactly where those vehicles were going. I needed proof. Not suspicion, not speculation. Evidence that would hold up in court. But I couldn't go through official channels yet. If I did, they'd catch wind of the investigation and scatter before we could touch them. This needed a quieter approach. I called in an old friend, Sergeant Tom Davis, one of the most dependable men I'd ever worked with. "I need your help," I told him. Off the books, he repeated, sighing. "This better be worth my badge." "It will be," I said. "Meet me tonight." Under the cover of darkness, Davis and I drove out to the edge of town, to a sprawling storage facility that had recently seen an unusual amount of nighttime traffic, especially from Reliable Roadside trucks. Gina, my tech-savvy wife, had hacked into their basic security cameras and tracked the vehicle's movements. Most tows ended up in one particular unit, C-17. We parked a block away and approached on foot, our flashlights off. The facility was a maze of corrugated steel doors and sodium lights that hummed softly overhead. Davis, who had spent years in undercover operations, picked the padlock with practiced ease. We slipped inside the unit and shut the door behind us. What we saw confirmed everything. It was a chop shop. Stripped truck frames lined the walls. License plates from 5 different states hung like trophies. On a workbench sat a stack of forged tow authorizations, each tied to a bogus HO violation. And, on top of that stack, Karen Wetlock's unmistakable signature. "This is bigger than I thought," Davis muttered, shaking his head. "Much bigger?" I agreed. But the most damning evidence wasn't on paper. It was in a binder beneath the documents. Dozens of blank vehicle titles, a VN plate engraving kit, and a ledger showing cash payments flowing from Oakwood Development to the towing company, and from there to Karen and the HOA treasurer, Barry Jenkins. We photographed everything: cars, documents, payment records. We didn't take anything, because we couldn't. Everything in that unit was technically off limits without a warrant. All we had now was knowledge, and knowledge wasn't admissible in court. "Why need a trigger?" I said as we drove home. "Something that lets us get a warrant legally." A fate handed us one, in the worst possible way. 2 days later, I received a call from Officer Miller, a rookie I had mentored and the same one who'd nearly arrested me when Karen filed that false report. He was eager, idealistic, and a little reckless. "Chief," he said, "I've been looking into that towing company you mentioned. Something's not right. I followed one of their trucks to a model home in the new Oakwood development." My heart sank. "Miller, listen to me. Do not engage. Get out of there and send me the details." There was a pause. "I think they're moving a vehicle now," he whispered. "I'm in the trees across the street." The line went dead. I called back. No answer. I traced his GPS. It was still at the site, but it wasn't moving. My stomach turned cold. Miller hadn't just stumbled into evidence. He'd stumbled into danger. I grabbed my gear and called Davis. "Meet me at the Oakwood site. 10 minutes, no sirens, no backup. We do this quiet." The drive was a blur. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I realized. All the planning, all the careful groundwork. It was over. This was no longer about evidence. It was about saving one of my officers. The site was deserted, half-finished houses looming like skeletons in the moonlight. Davis was waiting for me, a tire iron in hand. "Guns are too loud," he said grimly. We approached the model home from the rear, creeping through the shadows. Through a narrow window, I saw Miller, tied to a chair, his face bruised. Two men were inside. One paced with a pistol. The other lounged on a couch, watching TV. "They're pros," Davis muttered. "Not tow truck drivers." "Worse," I said. "Car thieves." We slipped inside through an unlocked sliding door. The thug on the couch never saw me coming. One swing of the heavy flashlight, and he was unconscious. The man with the gun was trickier. We needed a distraction. Davis hurled a vase down the hall. It shattered loudly, and the gunman stepped into the hallway to investigate. Right into my boot as I kicked the door open. Davis tackled him, wrestled the pistol away, and slapped on cuffs. I cut Miller loose. "You okay, kid?" He nodded, shaken but alive. "I was trying to help," he said. "You did," I replied. "You just gave us probable cause." And just like that, the entire game changed. With a kidnapped officer, a firearm with a filed-off serial number, and two suspects in custody, we now had everything we needed to bring the full weight of the law down on Karen Whitlock and her empire. The kidnapping changed everything. What had begun as petty HOA harassment had now escalated into a full-blown criminal conspiracy, and the law was finally on our side. Within hours of Miller's rescue, I had the wheels of justice turning. A judge signed an emergency warrant to search the model home and any connected properties. By dawn, forensic teams were combing the site for evidence. Detectives were cataloging every detail, and the press had already started circling like vultures. But this wasn't about headlines. It was about justice and revenge. The search turned up a treasure trove. Miller's stolen service weapon, a stack of burner phones, detailed logs of vehicles towed, stripped, and sold. And most importantly, data. The kind of evidence that doesn't lie. Hard drives, financial records, GPS data, and digital files that traced the operation from the muscle on the street all the way up to the HOA office. And sitting at the center of it all was Karen Whitlock. With the kidnapping charge added to the list, we now had more than enough probable cause to seize HOA records and Oakwood Development's financial documents. What we uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. For every car they stole, for every fake fine they issued, money flowed in a perfectly orchestrated triangle. The Oakwood paid the HOA for community improvements. Barry Jenkins siphoned a cut into a slush fund, and from there, regular cash payments went to reliable roadside recovery, and ultimately into Karen's personal account. And it wasn't small change. We were talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gina, who had a background in forensic accounting, worked around the clock. She mapped every transaction, every shell company, every shadow account. And the pattern was undeniable. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a willing architect of a criminal enterprise. Barry handled the books. Oakwood provided the cover. And Karen weaponized the HOA bylaws to identify, target, and justify the thefts. But there was still one problem. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Karen and her son had yet to be caught in the act. And in cases like this, a jury loves nothing more than undeniable, irrefutable proof. The kind you can play on a screen and say, "There. That's them." I wanted that moment, not just for the case, but for me. So we came up with a plan. We would use the Mustang as bait. It was risky, but it was the one thing we knew Karen and Chase couldn't resist. I hated the thought of putting my father's legacy on the line. But Gina was right. "It's not the car that matters," she said, soldering a tiny microphone into the dashboard. "It's what we'll catch them saying inside it." We spent 2 nights preparing. A GPS tracker, hidden deep inside the chassis. a voice-activated audio device that transmitted in real time to a secure server. Even a camera embedded in the rearview mirror. By the time we were done, the Mustang was no longer just a car. It was a trap. The stage was set for the annual HOA gala, an overblown spectacle held under a massive white tent on the community green. This year's theme was Building the Future, and the guest of honor was none other than Oakwood's CEO. I planned to make sure that future included prison time. I planted the first seed 2 days before the event. While chatting with neighbor Tony, I, casually, mentioned that I was thinking about selling the Mustang. I told him the HOA pressure had become too much, and I was ready to part with the car. I knew Tony couldn't keep a secret, and I was counting on it. Within 24 hours, the entire neighborhood knew my Mustang was for sale. On the day of the gala, I made sure the bait was irresistible. I left the garage door open just a few inches, enough for anyone passing by to notice. Hanging just inside was a magnetic hook with a single key on it, plain as day. I even tucked a fake, for sale, sign under the Mustang's windshield wiper, complete with a burner phone number. Now, it was just a waiting game. Elena and I dressed for the gala as if nothing unusual was happening. I wore my best suit. She slipped into a black dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a spy movie. Sergeant Davis and a team of undercover officers parked a block away in an unmarked van, listening to our comms and watching the live GPS feed. If Karen or Chase made a move, we'd know immediately. The tent was packed. Neighbors mingled over champagne, the jazz band played something forgettable, and Karen, dressed in a silver gown that screamed self-importance, held court at the head table. The Oakwood CEO was beside her, smiling like a man with too much money and too few morals. Barry Jenkins hovered nearby, sweating through his tuxedo. But there was one person notably absent: Chase. Good. That meant he was busy. Gina stood beside me, her phone disguised as a cocktail clutch. Through the hidden app, she monitored the Mustang's GPS. The car was still in my garage. Until it wasn't. Movement, she whispered. Garage sensor just tripped. Someone's inside. My pulse quickened. I lifted my drink, pretending to sip, and scanned the room. Karen was still at the table, glancing at her phone every few seconds. She was in on it. She knew. The car's moving, Gina murmured. It's leaving the driveway. 10 minutes later, Karen stepped up to the podium, her voice syrupy sweet as she tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, we have a very special surprise tonight. Our partners at Oakwood Development have generously arranged a donation. A new vehicle for our community security patrol. And then, as if on cue, the tent flaps opened and headlights cut through the rain-soaked darkness. My father's Mustang, candy apple red, chrome gleaming, rolled into the tent. And behind the wheel, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, was Chase. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Everyone in Willow Creek knew that car. They had seen it in my driveway. They knew it was mine. And now it was being paraded in front of them like a prize. Karen's smile was radiant, triumphant. Let's have a round of applause for my son Chase, whose initiative made this possible. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. Then Gina tapped her phone. From hidden speakers inside the tent, audio from the Mustang's microphone filled the room. Karen's voice, calm and confident. He's gone. Good. The key is on the hook. Drive it straight to the gala. We'll file it as a donation tomorrow. The room fell silent. The color drained from Karen's face. Chase froze behind the wheel. And then the recording continued. This time Chase's own voice. Stupid old cop thinks he's so smart. This car is mine now. A panic erupted. Karen screamed that the audio was fake. The Oakwood CEO bolted for the exit, only to be stopped by Davis's officers. And Chase, he panicked. He slammed the accelerator, sending the Mustang skidding across the wet vinyl floor straight toward the stage. I didn't think. I acted. I vaulted over a table, reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and dragged Chase out by his collar. The car stalled and rolled to a stop inches from Karen's podium. And then the tent lit up with flashing red and blue. Davis strode forward, badge in hand. "Karen Whitlock, you're under arrest for conspiracy, insurance fraud, and grand theft auto." The crowd erupted in disbelief. Barry was cuffed next, sputtering protests, and Chase, hands trembling, was led away in silence. The aftermath was everything I had imagined, and more. News vans swarmed the neighborhood by morning, their satellite dishes poking into the gray sky as reporters shouted questions over one another. "Police chief's Mustang theft uncovers massive HOA crime ring," the headline screamed. Overnight, Willow Creek went from a quiet suburban enclave to ground zero for one of the most audacious white-collar crime investigations in state history. Karen, Barry, and Chase faced a laundry list of charges: conspiracy to commit grand theft auto, wire fraud, kidnapping, falsifying police reports, and obstruction of justice, among others. Oakwood Development's CEO wasn't spared either. Federal agents swooped in, freezing accounts and seizing records. By the time the dust settled, the entire company was under investigation for racketeering. The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors laid out the entire conspiracy with surgical precision. The forged violation notices, the stolen vehicles, the shell companies, the bribed officials. The jury didn't take long. Barry pled guilty and cut a deal. Chase, facing time as an adult, took a plea bargain. Karen, ever defiant, insisted she was the victim of a setup. The jury disagreed. Guilty. On all counts. I attended every day of the trial. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to look her in the eye when the verdict was read, and when the judge sentenced her to 15 years without parole, she finally broke. All the arrogance, all the entitlement, all the smugness. Gone. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen Whitlock was silent. As for me, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA was disbanded, replaced by a community-led board that focused on neighborhood safety instead of petty power games. The stolen vehicles were recovered and returned to their owners. And the Mustang, my father's Mustang, was once again parked safely in my garage, its polished chrome gleaming under the light. One evening, a few months later, I took it for a drive. The V8 rumbled beneath me, the smell of gasoline and leather filling the air. I rolled the windows down, letting the warm breeze hit my face as I cruised down the empty highway, and for the first time in a long time I felt at peace. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's over," she said. "Yeah," I replied, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "It's over." But as the Mustang roared forward, I couldn't help but smile. Because deep down, I knew that people like Karen would always exist. People who believed the rules didn't apply to them. Who thought power gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. And as long as they did, I'd be ready. Badge or no badge, uniform or not, I'd stand in their way. Because justice isn't just a job, it's who I am. And no entitled person, no corrupt HOA, and no greedy developer will ever change that.